We like to think of America's founding fathers as 5D chess grandmasters in powdered wigs, playing out a flawless plan for a perfect nation. Let's be real. While they had some genius moments, they also made some decisions so monumentally dumb, it's a miracle the whole experiment didn't implode before the ink was dry. We're skipping the obvious controversies and diving straight into the 44 most absurd, facepalm-worthy blunders that prove even brilliant guys can have a hold my beer and watch this moment. This is about to get ridiculous. 1. Let's kick things off with a move so boneheaded it feels like a prank. The founders looked at the highest office in the land and decided, you know what this needs? A built-in nemesis. They made the guy who lost the presidential election the vice president. Just marinate on that. It's like losing the Super Bowl and being forced to be the winning quarterback's personal assistant for 4 years. This wasn't just a political oddity. It was basically a government-mandated reality show called America's Next Top Saboteur, where the VP's only job was to hope the president choked on a pretzel. It was a guaranteed recipe for a dysfunctional, backstabbing nightmare. 2. Okay, picture this. You just fought a whole revolution because you were sick of some dudes in wigs across the ocean taxing you into oblivion. So, when you build your new government, what's rule number 1? Probably something like, the guys in charge can't just give themselves a raise whenever they feel like it, right? Wrong. They came up with an amendment to stop Congress from cashing in on their own pay hikes, but then promptly forgot to get it passed. It sat there, collecting dust like a piece of old furniture for 202 years. It took a random college kid in the 1980s doing a history paper to basically say, guys, you gonna finish this? 3. Buried deep in the Constitution's terms and conditions is a little thing called the Commerce Clause. It says Congress can regulate commerce among the several states. It sounds harmless, but the way they wrote it was so ridiculously vague, it was like a legal blank check. It's the constitutional equivalent of your parents saying, just be home at a reasonable hour. What does that even mean? This single, fuzzy sentence became the government's magic wand to justify getting involved in literally everything, from what kind of light bulbs you can buy to what you grow in your own backyard for your own family. It's the loophole that ate America. 4. The Founding Fathers were so ridiculously proud of the Constitution, they basically put it in a vibranium vault, surrounded it with sharks with laser beams, and threw away the key. They designed an amendment process so insanely difficult, it's easier to teach a cat to file your taxes. You need a super-duper majority in Congress, then you need a super-duper-duper majority of the states to agree. It's a system designed by someone who has never tried to get a group of people to agree on a pizza topping. As a result, the country is stuck with rules that are centuries out of date, because trying to change them is a political suicide mission. 5. This might be the most precious, adorably stupid assumption in all of world history. The founders genuinely built the entire government on the belief that politicians would be noble, selfless gentlemen who would politely debate philosophy and act only for the common good. They literally thought Washington, D.C. would be a big, happy book club. It's like building a shark tank and just assuming the sharks will decide to become vegans. The second the government turned on, political parties formed and immediately started a brutal, non-stop cage match that makes professional wrestling look tame. Bless their innocent, naive hearts. 6. So, after winning the war for independence, the founders' first crack at a government, the Articles of Confederation, had one tiny, insignificant flaw. It couldn't collect taxes. At all. The entire federal government's funding strategy was to basically send a Venmo request to the states and hope for the best. Hey Virginia, we're fighting some pirates. Can you spot us a few bucks? Pulses respond. Predictably, the states left the federal government on read, leaving it completely broke, powerless, and unable to even pay the soldiers who had just won the war. It was less a government and more a national GoFundMe campaign that failed miserably. 7. If thinking parties wouldn't form was naive, this next one is just willful ignorance. They designed the entire operating system for the country, the electoral college, the checks and balances, everything, without ever considering the possibility of political parties. It's like designing a state-of-the-art car, but completely forgetting to account for the existence of roads or weather. They built a beautiful, intricate two-player game but wrote the instruction manual as if only one person would ever be playing. The result? The other player immediately started flipping the board over and lighting the pieces on fire, a tradition that continues to this day. 8. You would think, for the single most important job in the country, they would be crystal clear on the qualifications. Nope. The Constitution says the president has to be a natural-born citizen. And what precisely does that mean? They didn't say. They just scribbled it down, shrugged, and presumably went to the pub, leaving a ticking time bomb of angry cable news segments for every future generation. Does it mean born on U.S. soil? Born to American parents? Born during a full moon while eating an apple pie? Thanks to this epic moment of, hey, they'll figure it out, we have been blessed with an endless supply of brain-dead political drama. 9. Imagine trying to break up with someone while also proposing marriage in the same letter. That's basically what the Continental Congress did in 1775. In one of the most baffling diplomatic moves ever, they sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III, basically saying, hey big guy, we're still your loyal subjects. Can we please hug it out? At the exact same time, they approved a full-scale military invasion of Canada, hoping the Canadians would join their little rebellion. It's the political equivalent of texting "you up" to your ex while you're literally trying to burn their house down. The mixed signals weren't just confusing, they were pants-on-head stupid. 10. The bald eagle, majestic, fierce, a symbol of freedom soaring through the sky. Now picture this instead. The national bird is a turkey, a plump, wattle-necked, gobbling bird best known for being delicious and inducing post-meal naps. This wasn't a joke. Benjamin Franklin, one of the sharpest minds of his generation, seriously advocated for the turkey. He thought the eagle was a bird of bad moral character that just stole fish from other birds. Meanwhile, he called the turkey a much more respectable bird and a true original native of America. We dodged a massive bullet on that one, narrowly avoiding having our national seal look like a Butterball commercial. 11. John Adams was a champion of liberty, a firebrand for freedom, a guy who risked his neck for the right to speak his mind. Then he became president and immediately decided that freedom of speech was actually kind of annoying. In a move of staggering hypocrisy, he signed the Sedition Act, which made it a literal crime to criticize him or his government. It's the 18th century version of an influencer having a meltdown and trying to get their haters arrested. Suddenly, the guy who helped write the "all men are created equal" part was throwing newspaper editors in jail for making fun of his policies. The ultimate rules for thee but not for me moment. 12. Alexander Hamilton found himself accused of financial corruption. An honorable man would deny it, present evidence, and clear his name. Hamilton, however, chose the "nuke my entire life from orbit" option. To prove he wasn't misusing government funds, he published a 95-page pamphlet admitting, in excruciating detail, that the money was actually hush money for a sordid affair he was having. He basically told the entire nation, "I'm not a crook, I'm just a cheating scumbag. See? Totally different." He successfully cleared his name of corruption by permanently destroying his political future and humiliating his wife. A true masterclass in winning the battle while losing the war, your marriage, and your dignity. 13. During the Revolutionary War, if you were an American soldier, your biggest fear shouldn't have been a British musket ball. It should have been your own doctor. The Continental Army's medical department was less of a functional health service and more of a disorganized dumpster fire. It was so poorly managed that disease, infection, and outright medical malpractice killed far more soldiers than actual combat. Getting wounded was a coin toss, but being sent to the field hospital was a death sentence. The British didn't need bullets when America's top generals had assembled a crack team of plague enthusiasts and amateur surgeons to finish the job for them. 14. Thomas Jefferson, a man of many ideas, had one that was particularly brilliant. Why do we need a big, expensive navy? He thought big fleets were aggressive, and a waste of money. So he slashed the Navy down to a handful of tiny gunboats, basically the 18th century equivalent of a sad-looking inflatable raft. What happened next? The Barbary pirates of North Africa, who were basically the ocean's mobsters, immediately started hijacking American ships and demanding tribute. Jefferson's cost-saving measure resulted in the USA paying humiliating protection money just so its ships wouldn't get stolen. It was the geopolitical equivalent of firing your bodyguard and then paying the local bully not to punch you in the face. 15. Ethan Allen was a certified badass. A giant of a man, leader of the legendary Green Mountain Boys, and a genuine war hero who captured a key fort with pure bravado. So how did the Continental Congress reward this larger-than-life patriot? They basically ignored him, questioned his authority, and treated him like an annoying intern. They managed to piss off their most effective loose cannon so badly that Allen, feeling completely snubbed, started secret negotiations with the British to have his home state of Vermont rejoin the British Empire. It takes a special kind of bureaucratic genius to alienate your own hero to the point where he considers joining the other team. 16. This is less of a dumb decision and more of a "are you completely insane?" moment. George Washington needed a commander for West Point, the single most important military fort in the entire country. His choice for this critical job? General Benedict Arnold. Yes, that Benedict Arnold. A man who was famously deep in debt, had a massive ego, and was publicly whining that Congress hadn't promoted him enough. Giving the keys to your most vital fortress to the angriest, most bitter, and most financially desperate guy in your entire army is not just bad strategy. It's the kind of thing that happens in a comedy movie right before the villain reveals his obviously evil plan. The worst HR decision in American history, bar none. 17. You've created a brilliant new government with 3 co-equal branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. You build a magnificent house for the president. You build a grand hall for Congress. And for the Supreme Court, the highest legal body in the land, you give them nothing. For the first decade of its existence, the Supreme Court was basically homeless. They had to borrow space in the basement of Congress, like a sad startup operating out of a garage. It's a shocking level of, oops, we forgot. They were so busy designing the rest of the government, they completely blanked on giving the judicial branch an actual place to do their jobs. The justices were literally forced to hear cases wherever they could find an empty room. 18. Here's a hot tip for any new government. Don't tax the one thing your most heavily armed citizens use as money. On the rugged frontier of western Pennsylvania, whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was currency. It was easier to transport than grain, it never spoiled, and it could get you drunk. Alexander Hamilton, looking for cash, decided to slap a federal tax on it. The result was the Whiskey Rebellion, where furious farmers took up arms against the very government they just fought to create. It was a massive, self-inflicted crisis born from a complete misunderstanding of their own people. They essentially taxed the frontier's ATM machine and were then shocked when everyone showed up with pitchforks. 19. To fund the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress had a brilliant idea. Just print more money. Lots and lots of it. The only problem was this money, called Continentals, was backed by absolutely nothing. No gold, no silver, just the vague promise of a government that was currently losing a war. They printed so much of it that it became hilariously worthless. The phrase, "not worth a continental," became the common way of saying something was utter garbage. Soldiers were paid in paper that was worth less than the paper it was printed on. It was the financial equivalent of trying to put out a fire with a fire hose that sprays gasoline. 20. Alexander Hamilton needed to protect America's brand new industries from foreign competition. So he proposed some temporary tariffs on imported goods. He sold them as a short-term kickstart, like training wheels for the American economy. Well, those temporary training wheels have now been on the bike for over 200 years. These tariffs became a permanent feature of the American economic landscape, evolving and changing, but never truly going away. It's the ultimate example of a government program that was supposed to be a quick fix and instead became an immortal, unkillable part of the system. Never get between a politician and a source of revenue. 21. The French Revolution brought the world a gift of pure, logical genius: the metric system. A simple base 10 system for weights and measures. No more weird conversions, no more remembering how many feet are in a mile. Thomas Jefferson loved it and saw a golden opportunity to modernize the United States. He pushed for its adoption. But Congress, in its infinite wisdom, basically said, "Nah, we're good." They decided to stick with the chaotic, nonsensical mess of inches, pounds, ounces, and gallons. It was a conscious choice to reject simplicity and embrace confusion, a decision that has haunted every American science student and anyone who has ever tried to follow a European recipe ever since. 22. In another stroke of let's not think about the future brilliance, Hamilton created the first Bank of the United States. It was a central bank designed to stabilize the economy. But to get it passed, he had to agree to a compromise. The bank's charter would only last for 20 years. So in 1811, right on schedule, the bank's charter expired and it ceased to exist. And what happened in 1812, just 1 year later? The United States stumbled into a major war with Great Britain. The country was forced to fight a global superpower without a central bank to manage its finances, leading to a complete financial mess. They put a ticking time bomb at the heart of their economy and then acted surprised when it blew up at the worst possible moment. 23. Congress passed the Militia Act of 1792, which was their big plan for national defense. The plan was basically DIY. The law required every able-bodied white male citizen to, and I'm not kidding, purchase their own military-grade musket, bayonet, and ammunition. The government wasn't providing the gear. You had to go out and buy it yourself. It was a national defense strategy based on the honor system and everyone's personal shopping habits. Imagine a modern government telling its citizens, "Hey, there might be a war, so could you all please go buy your own tanks and fighter jets? Thanks a bunch." It was less a policy and more a lazy, unfunded mandate. 24. The American invasion of Canada during the War of 1812 was founded on a single, profoundly dumb idea: that the Canadians were just waiting to be liberated from the British and would welcome the American army with open arms. They genuinely thought their soldiers would march into Canada and be greeted as heroes. Instead, the Canadians, a mix of French and British loyalists, fought back furiously. They kind of liked their situation and were not at all interested in joining the chaotic American experiment. The campaign was a string of embarrassing failures and logistical nightmares, all because the entire premise was a fantasy cooked up by politicians who had clearly never met an actual Canadian. 25. You just won a revolution. Who was your #1 ride-or-die ally that made it all possible? France. They gave you money, ships, and soldiers. So, naturally, within a couple of decades, you decide to start a war with them. The quasi-war with France was an undeclared naval conflict where American and French ships were blasting each other to bits in the Atlantic. It all started over diplomatic squabbles and trade disputes. It's the geopolitical equivalent of your best man from your wedding trying to burn your house down because you didn't like his latest Facebook post. A stunningly fast way to alienate the one friend you absolutely needed in a world full of enemies. 26. For a brief, chaotic moment in the 1780s, there was a whole new state called Franklin, carved out of what is now eastern Tennessee. The settlers there got tired of being ignored by North Carolina, so they just declared independence and started their own government. And what did the US Congress do about this rogue state popping up on its frontier? Absolutely nothing. They were so weak and ineffective under the Articles of Confederation that they just watched as this bizarre political experiment appeared, sputtered, and then collapsed into a mess of conflicting land claims and rival governments. It was like watching a sitcom pilot that was so bad it got canceled halfway through the first episode. 27. When it came time to choose a location for the nation's permanent capital, the Founding Fathers had the entire East Coast to choose from. They could have picked a place with nice weather, solid ground, and a pleasant atmosphere. Instead, they compromised and chose a patch of swampy, mosquito-infested, humid swampland along the Potomac River. They literally built Washington, D.C. on a malarial bog. The place was notoriously miserable, hot, and disease-ridden for decades. It was a political compromise that resulted in the worst possible real estate decision, guaranteeing that for the next century, politicians would be sweating through their wool suits in a literal fever dream of a city. 28. Aaron Burr was the sitting vice president. Alexander Hamilton was the former Secretary of the Treasury. These were two of the most brilliant, powerful men in the entire country. And they decided the best way to settle a personal grudge was to row across a river at dawn and shoot pistols at each other. Let that sink in. Instead of using their giant brains to, run the country, they engaged in a deadly duel over some petty political insults. Hamilton died, and Burr's career was ruined. It's an act of such monumental, ego-driven stupidity that it's hard to even comprehend. It's like watching Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos decide to settle a dispute with a lightsaber fight to the death. 29. The Yazoo land scandal was corruption on a truly epic scale. In the 1790s, the state of Georgia sold off millions upon millions of acres of land. We're talking an area the size of Alabama and Mississippi, to a handful of politically connected companies for pennies on the dollar. We're talking about a sale price of roughly 1.5 cents per acre. How? Because nearly every single member of the Georgia legislature had been bribed. It was a shameless, open-air fire sale of public land that stunk so bad it reached the Supreme Court. It was a perfect demonstration that the founders' noble Republican virtue had already been replaced with good old-fashioned, greasy-palmed greed. 30. The French Revolution started with inspiring ideals of liberty and equality, and many founders like Thomas Jefferson were its biggest cheerleaders. But then it took a dark turn. A really dark turn. It became the Reign of Terror, a period of paranoid bloodlust where people were being sent to the guillotine for basically anything. Despite the daily, state-sanctioned massacres, Jefferson and his allies continued to passionately defend the revolution. He famously wrote that he'd rather see the whole earth desolated than see the revolution fail. It's a pretty chilling look at how ideological zeal can make you cheerlead for what was effectively a gruesome, out-of-control slaughter. 31. In the middle of the Revolutionary War, with the army freezing at Valley Forge and morale at rock bottom, a group of high-ranking army officers and members of Congress decided it was the perfect time for a little coup. Known as the Conway Cabal, this wasn't just grumbling. It was a concerted effort to discredit and remove George Washington as commander-in-chief and replace him with one of their own guys. Their brilliant plan was to undermine the one man holding the entire, fragile revolution together during the war's darkest hour. It was a spectacular display of ego and short-sightedness that could have easily lost them the entire war. 32. When you think of America's military history, you might not think of a battle where nearly the entire U.S. Army was wiped out in a single morning. But that's exactly what happened at the Battle of the Wabash in 1791. The Founding Fathers appointed General Arthur St. Clair, a man whose primary military skills seemed to be incompetence, to lead a campaign against Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory. His poorly trained, badly supplied army was ambushed and suffered a casualty rate of over 97%. It remains the single worst defeat the United States Army has ever suffered in its history, a complete and utter catastrophe orchestrated by poor leadership from the very top. 33. During the Constitutional Convention, when they were brainstorming ideas for the presidency, Alexander Hamilton stood up and pitched an idea so monumentally out of touch, it must have stunned the room into silence. He proposed that the president and senators should serve for life. Not for a term, not for a few years, but for life. On good behavior. He was essentially arguing for an elected American monarchy. After a bloody revolution to get rid of a king, Hamilton's brilliant idea was to immediately create a new, slightly different king. It was so wildly unpopular that it was instantly rejected, but it gives you a terrifying glimpse into how easily this whole democracy thing could have gone in a very, very different direction. 34. After Aaron Burr infamously killed Alexander Hamilton and wrecked his own career, he didn't just retire quietly, he went full supervillain. His pension plan was to travel west and try to create his own private empire. The plan was murky, but it involved either convincing Western states to secede from the USA, or raising a private army to invade Spanish-held Mexico, or maybe both. He was arrested and tried for treason. This was the former Vice President of the United States, actively trying to break the country apart for his own personal gain. It's a retirement strategy so audacious and insane, it makes all other political scandals look like minor HR violations. 35. Early in the Revolutionary War, instead of appointing a single, decisive commander-in-chief and letting him do his job, Congress decided that war should be managed by a committee. They created a board of war made up of politicians to oversee the military. As you can imagine, a war run by a slow, bickering, bureaucratic committee was an absolute disaster. They were terrible at logistics, constantly meddled in strategy, and were more focused on political maneuvering than on winning battles. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, except the kitchen was a battlefield, and the recipe was for national survival. They eventually figured it out and gave Washington more power, but not before nearly losing the war to their own red tape. 36. The Founding Fathers debated a lot of things, but one of the most crucial topics they considered and then promptly dropped was term limits for members of Congress. They talked about it, saw the potential danger of people making a lifelong career out of politics, and then just didn't do it. This single omission paved the way for the professional politician, a creature who can spend 40 or 50 years in Washington, becoming completely detached from the lives of the people they're supposed to represent. They saw the problem coming from a mile away and just decided to let future generations deal with it. Thanks, guys. 37. Thomas Jefferson was a genius, but he also had some ideas that were just plain weird. In a letter, he casually suggested that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It's one thing to support a revolution against a king, but Jefferson was basically arguing that the country should have a violent, bloody uprising every 20 years or so, just to keep things fresh. It's a terrifyingly casual endorsement of civil war as a form of political spring cleaning. A truly bizarre and radical idea from the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence. 38. In 1783, a group of unpaid, angry soldiers from the Continental Army marched on Philadelphia and surrounded the building where the Continental Congress was meeting. They were demanding the back pay they were owed for winning the war. Did Congress stand their ground? Did they negotiate? No. They did what any brave leaders would do. They panicked and literally fled the city in the middle of the night. The government of the United States was chased out of its own capital by its own unpaid army. It was the ultimate admission of failure, a pathetic and humiliating spectacle that showed just how powerless and broke the government was under the Articles of Confederation. 39. Politics can be a dirty game, but Alexander Hamilton took it to a whole new level of self-sabotage. In 1800, he was so angry at the sitting president John Adams, who was, I should remind you, a member of his own Federalist Party, that he wrote and published a vicious pamphlet attacking Adams's character and fitness for office. His goal was to secretly swing the election to another Federalist candidate. Instead, the pamphlet leaked, blew up in his face, split the party, and basically handed the presidency to their arch-nemesis, Thomas Jefferson. It was a political assassination that ended up being a political suicide bombing. 40. When designing the Supreme Court, Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1789. In it, they made one of the most short-sighted structural decisions imaginable. They set the number of justices at 6, an even number. This guaranteed the high probability of the court being deadlocked in a 3-3 tie on major cases, rendering it completely unable to make a final decision. It's like designing a basketball game to be played with 2 teams of an equal number of players and no overtime rules. They created a system practically designed for paralysis, a problem they had to fix later by thankfully, adding a seventh justice. 41. The Articles of Confederation wasn't just a bad first draft of a government. It was a masterpiece of incompetence. It created a national government so weak it was basically useless. It couldn't tax, it couldn't raise an army, it couldn't regulate trade between states, and it required a near-unanimous vote to get anything done. States ignored its laws, printed their own money, and acted like squabbling independent countries. It was so dysfunctional that the entire country was on the verge of collapse, forcing them to scrap the whole thing and start over. It was the political equivalent of building a car with no engine, no wheels, and no steering. 42. James Madison is hailed as the father of the Constitution, a brilliant architect of American government. At home, however, he couldn't control his own stepson, John Payne Todd. Todd was a gambling addict and an alcoholic who spent his life squandering the family's fortune. Madison spent years bailing him out of debt, paying off his gambling losses, and dealing with the consequences of his disastrous lifestyle. The man who could design a system to balance the powers of a nation was utterly powerless to stop his own stepson from drinking and gambling away everything they owned. It's a humble reminder that even the greatest geniuses can't solve family problems. 43. During the darkest days of the Revolution, with the army struggling for basic supplies, the Continental Congress decided to tackle a truly pressing issue: fun. In 1774, they passed a resolution discouraging every species of extravagance and dissipation. This included banning horse racing, cockfighting, plays, and other forms of public entertainment. Their logic was that people should be focused on piety and frugality during wartime. So while soldiers were freezing and starving, Congress was busy making sure no one was having too much fun at the theater. A classic case of politicians focusing on the things that absolutely do not matter in a crisis. 44. As a way to pay soldiers for their service, the cash-strapped government rewarded them with land grants in the Western Territories. There was just one small catch. The land they were giving away was already occupied by powerful and hostile Native American confederacies who were not interested in leaving. The veterans were essentially handed a piece of paper that was a coupon for a likely death sentence. It was a cheap and cynical way to settle a debt, offering a reward that was not only unusable but incredibly dangerous to even try and claim. It was the ultimate empty promise from a government that had run out of both money and ideas. And there you have it. 44 moments of pure, unadulterated "what were they thinking?" that prove the Founding Fathers were, in fact, human. They were brilliant, they were brave, and sometimes they were catastrophically dumb. It makes you wonder what future historians will say about the decisions being made today. So, here's a question for the comments. Which of these blunders do you think had the absolute worst long-term consequences for the United States? Let the debate begin. And if you enjoyed this tour through historical incompetence, make sure to execute your right to hit the like button and subscribe for more.